So I definitely think the uranium sector is one to look at, and then you've also got on the supply side, Russia, cutting off the US from uranium supply. So it's only going to be a constrained supply scenario with a rising demand story. So I do think something like URNM, even the junior uranium miners we have, URNJ, is definitely worth a look at from that perspective.
Hello, you're watching Proactive. I'm joined by Han ETF co-CEO Hector McNeil. Hector, very good to speak with you. And you called Bitcoin above $100,000, and it looks like that Trump trade is playing out. We had Bitcoin above $100,000 today. So do you think it has further legs?
Yeah, good afternoon, Stephen. Yes, I do. I think basically what's happening before our eyes is the democratization of getting involved in the crypto markets. And I think that what I've seen in the past 6 months and what's driven us to 100,000, and I think is going to get us to that probably 150,000 by mid-year next year, is just more professional investors getting involved. Whether it's endowments, whether it's pension funds, whether it's governments, whether it's institutional investors, more retail. All these things, and obviously the Bitcoin story is right in the political headlines as well. Trump buying his cup of coffee, a couple of months ago, using Bitcoin. I think it's just that momentum is going to keep going, and it's definitely got that sort of political wind where you've got to think the Biden administration was pretty much anti, or certainly putting the brakes on it anyway. So yeah, no, I think it's got very, very good short term momentum, and I could see it mid-year next year being 150,000 for sure.
I mean, Hector, Bitcoin and crypto as well. So how do you think they'll perform as an asset class in 2025? Could they outperform other asset classes?
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, it's obviously a nice asset class from the fact it's decorrelated from other asset classes, and people are always looking for that scenario. Obviously, Ethereum's an interesting play, especially with the staking scenario. And then I think we have a really nice MSCI top 20 index as well with the top 20 crypto coins, which is really nice because at the end of the day, you may not want to or have the wherewithal to come up with which coin is going to succeed. So if you've got an index that does that for you, I think that's the really, really smart way for investors to get involved. So I think generally the asset class has got an upward trajectory, and I think the sort of everything's going to be led from the front by Bitcoin from that perspective.
Okay, so Trump was perhaps a catalyst for that latest breakout in Bitcoin. Where else has his presidential win had an impact, say in the defense sector, Hector?
Yeah, I definitely think defense is really interesting, because obviously there's a huge amount of speculation in terms of whether, Trump is blustering about NATO paying more money or dropping NATO or whatever the story is. And I think it's almost like the perfect trade defense because if Trump takes the US out of NATO, then the NATO countries, especially Europeans, are going to have to spend more money. And if Trump stays in NATO, they're going to have to spend more money. So ultimately, I think it's a almost circular story, and I think it's all going to come to a reckoning quite quickly. With regards to what's going to happen in the Ukraine story. I think Trump thinks that's going to be easy. I don't think it is. And even post that, even if he does find peace in Ukraine, there's going to be a rebuild story in Ukraine, and part of that will be, almost to make Ukraine Israel on steroids. Israel has its protective dome from all its missile technology, and Ukraine's already got sophisticated weaponry, and that's only going to get more. And Western countries are going to want to get involved in the rebuild story. There's going to be billions, trillions to be made in that reconstruction story. So I think the defence story, and we've seen it with NATO. I mean, NATO in our ETF, which only invests in NATO countries and affiliates, it's up over 50% in the last 9 months. And as got some great stocks like British Aerospace, Lockheed, etc. These companies that are benefiting, and providing the front line on these stories. Rheinmetall, with the Tiger tank, they're building a factory in Ukraine. They've already got a repair factory there. And they're going to provide a production line factory there. So yeah, no, I think defence is definitely a place I'd be parking my money for the next 5 to 10 years, I would say.
I mean, a couple of other sectors that look quite interesting with Trump as president include oil and gas as well as uranium. So maybe let's start with oil and gas. You've got your midstream energy ETF, which would give investors exposure to that.
Yeah, MMLP is interesting because it's not a pure oil and gas play. It's as you said, it's infrastructure, which obviously you can't move this stuff around unless you've got pipelines, and there tends to be tax breaks in the US as well for those sorts of long-term investments. So they pay and encourage the people to put them together. So I do think the MOLP is a great way to play that. And I think we're just a smidgen under 100 million in that fund. It's almost doubled this year alone. So I think that's a great sector to look at. And certainly, Trump is going to open up or liberalize the availability of licenses. That he's going to, make sure there's a lot of investment going into that sector. So I definitely think that's a place to be looking at, and not just even short to medium term. I think, and that will create a juggernaut of its own. Even if there's a change of administration 4 years' time, it'll be very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle for that, I think.
And then how about nuclear, which investors can get access to through your Sprott Uranium Miners ETF?
Yeah, so we've got the URNM, which actually is quite a unique ETF, Stephen, because it's 80% equities, uranium miners, and then it's 20% actual physical uranium held in a vault. So URNM is a great product for getting exposure to that future story. And I think Trump and his administration are great fans of nuclear. Obviously the wind doesn't blow every day and the sun doesn't shine. So if you want a clean energy to underpin that, nuclear makes a lot of sense. And then you've seen all the speculation around the tech sector, particularly to power the AI revolution that's going on. There's a realization that nuclear has to be the way forward on that. And you're even talking about Microsoft's involvement on the Three Mile Island set up there, and the mini reactors that companies like Rolls-Royce have been pioneering. So I definitely think the uranium sector is one to look at. And then you've also got on the supply side, Russia, cutting off the US from uranium supply. So it's only going to be a constrained supply scenario with a rising demand story. So I do think something like URNM, even the junior uranium miners we have, URNJ, is definitely worth a look at from that perspective. It's more volatile, but actually you get a purer play to the uranium market with those. So I think URNM and URNJ are definitely ETFs to look at to ride that story for sure.
I mean, Trump's also been threatening higher tariffs on imports, and particularly from China, but also from some of his neighbors in Canada and Mexico and the likes. So he really is looking at bringing it all back home, so more onshoring.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think to Biden's credit, he was pretty well wedded to that as well. And I think there's been a huge amount of people bringing back manufacturing and production. I mean, I think the challenge is obviously it's a global supply chain. For especially the high technology focused builds or big manufacturing like car assembly, etc. But certainly Trump, I think, will be very aggressive to make sure that if it can be built in America and stay in America, then he'll want that. So I think onshoring generally will be an interesting area to look at. We don't have an ETF in that space, but there are them in the US. And I think you'll find them in Europe at some point. You can't promise that we'll be doing one, but you never know. But I think onshoring will definitely be an area to look at as well with the Trump trade. So people should definitely consider that sector for sure.
Yeah, 2025 definitely looks like it's going to be interesting, Hector. We won't count on you getting that Bitcoin up to 150,000 by the middle of the year, but let's see.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Stephen, as always. Thank you. Pleasure.
That's Han ETF co-CEO Hector McNeil.